Dr. Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I know you've been sitting there listening to the interview I just conducted with this poor woman whose parents were both kidnapped. One has been returned, one hasn't yet. First of all, what was your response to that interview?
On the human level, I saw a very decent person in evident pain, in grief, obviously deep anxiety about the fate of her father, and my heart goes out to her.
You specialize throughout your career in trauma and helping people get through trauma. You've talked to many people who've been in extreme trauma. This is a very traumatic situation these last 2 months for people on both sides, for the people who are on the receiving end of this massacre on October the 7th, and we've just heard firsthand what that has been like for the people in Israel who suffered that, but also, of course, what's going on now in Gaza with many thousands of innocent people being killed, with Israel's military response, including thousands of children. What is your overall assessment of where this war is now heading?
For that, you need some historical context. Now, look, I used to be a Zionist. As you mentioned, I'm a Holocaust survivor. Zionism was very important for me as a salvation of the Jewish people, until I found out that the state was founded based on the extirpation, the expulsion, and multiple massacres of the local population. And that's not historically controversial. So I'm taking a longer view of this. And I'm saying that the present situation cannot be understood without looking at the historical context, and nor can we move forward if the present occupation and the suppression of the Palestinians continue. So Sharon, your previous guest, talked about the fragile coexistence. There was no coexistence. There was oppression, periodic massacres, land occupation in the West Bank, the continuous expulsion of the population from their homes. I visited the occupied territories 3 times now. The first time back during the first Intifada, Piers, I cried every day out for 2 weeks at what I saw. So this cannot go on. I'm not talking about 1948. I'm talking about since '67 and what's going on right now.
Yes, I completely agree with you. This is a never-ending cycle. I guess from the Israelis' point of view, what happened on October the 7th was on such a gigantically horrific scale. I do get a sense that Israel is in a collective sense of trauma, and that they are determined that Hamas should not be allowed to perpetrate such a massacre again. So I guess my question for you is, what should Israel's response be? Everyone is increasingly concerned about what is going on in Gaza. Clearly, the loss of civilian life is on a catastrophic scale. Nobody thinks this is right, but at the same time, I think many would share my view that Israel has a right to defend itself.
Most Israelis are not aware of the history of what the Palestinians have suffered. They don't know that in 1948 there were multiple massacres of large numbers of people by Israeli forces. They don't know the history, the subjective experience of the Palestinians. And in the absence of that knowledge, October 7th would just strike them as another horrific anti-Semitic event.
The question is, how do they do that appropriately? And how do they get rid of Hamas, if indeed you think they should get rid of Hamas?
I understand the desire for defense and certainly even the desire for revenge, but that's in the absence of knowing what the Palestinian experience has been. And the Western press, and as in all countries where the local population has been displaced, the majority of the population doesn't know the history or the subjective experience. So if you're asking me how to move forward, let's inform ourselves of the actual experience of both sides, not just one side. And just as you had this wonderful Israeli woman, Sharon here, who spoke with such humanity and such poignancy, you might have some Palestinians on explaining their experience of what it's like for them to live under occupation. And in the absence of that conversation, there's no moving forward. And that's all I'm asking for. Let me say one more thing, sorry.
Yeah.
Israel's right to defense.
Yeah.
Yes, Israel has the right to defend itself. Every country does. But Israel has no right to impose an occupation on people. We talk about Israel's right of defense. We're taking isolated Palestinian actions, but we're not saying that this population also has the right to defend against the occupation. I'm not justifying the terrible events of October the 7th. I'm talking in the absence of historical awareness. It all just looks like Israel defending itself. But against whom? Against the population that has been massacring in a number of thousands for 80 years and taking their lands and destroying their homes and jailing their children and torturing them. That's the history. As Israeli historians have shown, I don't make this stuff up. Piers, you have to go there to see it for yourself, as I have. And you would cry every day for 2 weeks as well. Most Israelis are simply not aware. I've been to Israel, talked to people. They have no idea what's happening a few miles away from when they're sitting in Tel Aviv having coffee, how those people under occupation are living. And I'm saying that unless we fully get the Palestinian experience historically and throughout the decades and into the present moment, we can't possibly understand what's going on here. Now, in 2005, there was a study appeared in the Journal of World Psychiatry looking at traumatized populations under war conditions. The most traumatized children in 2005, this is before Hamas gained power in Palestine and in Gaza. The most traumatized kids were in Gaza.
Yeah.